Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and all the better because you're joining me this evening for the part 3 of our story, and it's terribly exciting, isn't it? Because we're getting close to discovering how bad this pipe actually is. And let's continue with the story. When I returned home to Honeysuckle Cottage that night, I confided in my husband Lucas about the rather unprecedented happenings during my day spent at the thrift shop. He agreed with me wholeheartedly that Gladys had been exceedingly unreasonable towards me. Honestly, there was no need for Gladys to be so unkind to you. You work at that thrift shop out of the goodness of your heart. You don't get paid for the job you do. I doubt she'd have turned the donation away if the same girl had approached her. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's the way I see it. More to the point, had that young girl not mentioned that a serial killer had once owned the pipe, no one would have been any the wiser. Think about it for a moment, sweetheart. Half the things they sell at the thrift shop, people don't know where on earth the things came from, or who the previous owner was of the second-hand goods that they're dispatching. If the woman had not volunteered that information, then Gladys would have been none the wiser, and would probably have sold that pipe for a nice sum of money. My point exactly. Lucas put an arm around me, kissing me tenderly on the cheek. People in small towns can be very superstitious, sweetheart. Don't be mad with Gladys. She's just doing her best to run the thrift store in the best way she can. She probably was rather freaked out on learning about the story you told her. But I'm sure it will blow over in the morning, and you will be the best of friends again. I like Gladys very much. She's a good sort of woman, but she certainly blew a fuse over that pipe. It's really upset her, but I admit it is quite a story. And personally, if I knew a pipe I was thinking of purchasing had been owned by a serial killer, it would give me pause for thought before I just dipped into my pocket to pay for the thing. But why? When you go to a bar and you receive a glass of wine that has been washed many times over, you have no way of knowing who drank from the glass before you did. It's the same thing, surely. I'm not so sure it is, sweetheart. But we could go around in circles discussing this. The main thing is you threw away the pipe. And that, in the end, is what matters. If I were you, I would put it all behind me. If you keep frowning like that, sweetheart, you'll have permanent furrows between your brows, and it'll make you look as if you're very grumpy, and I don't want you to look like that. You don't think the girl was making the story up as some kind of macabre practical joke, do you? I asked my husband, as I knocked back a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, to calm down the angst that was spinning around inside me like a Catherine wheel. No, sweetheart, I doubt that very much. That would be a cruel, rather strange thing to do. What would be the point of that anyway? You said the girl was quite shy, so she would be even less likely to make up a story like that. Maybe her conscience was prickled and she felt she needed to warn you about the pipe, given the ominous events that had transpired with her uncle. I think she did the right thing mentioning it to you. I mean, after all, people would like to know if a thing that they're purchasing had belonged to somebody like that. Still, I'm not sure many people would be eager to buy the thing if they learn about the history. But then again, I could be proven wrong. As you were saying to Gladys, it could be an object of curiosity to someone. You never know. People can be very strange. Anyway, let's move on from here, shall we? This morbid subject is really getting me rather fired up. Personally, I'd have loved to have seen your face when that snake fell out onto the table. I wish I'd been a fly on the wall. Gladys was right. It was probably just someone's pet. Well, I'm glad you find my fear so entertaining, Lucas. Well, you've got to admit it. It must have been quite funny to watch. I'm not admitting anything of the kind, Lucas. It was a terrifying experience for me. The following morning I returned to the in-the-closet thrift shop, feeling like a wounded soldier that was expected to fight on the front line again, and wondering if I'd managed to walk away without feeling as if my world was falling apart beneath me. I didn't think I could face another day of Gladys snapping my head off like a turtle, and when I slipped into the shop I was almost afraid to greet her, but she gave me a warm smile, and my spirits immediately lifted. Gladys looked as if her dark mood had evaporated, and she was back to being her jovial, fun-loving self again. So the day looked promising, as if it offered the potential to become a very pleasant day indeed. By all accounts, things improved exponentially, and got to a very good flying start, when Gladys apologised profusely for me, for being so brusque in her manner the previous day. "I'm so sorry, Gwen. I don't know what to say. I overreacted about the pipe. It just freaked me out, you know. It just seemed such a bad omen, receiving something like that in our shop. But thank God it's all behind us now. And thankfully the bin men will have collected it in the morning and taken it 1,000 miles away from here, to some landfill site, where hopefully it'll be buried in the depths of the earth in some kind of grave there, and be remembered no more. We can sigh with relief, can't we now, and move on. You do forgive me, don't you, Gwen?" she asked me, studying me with a worried expression in her warm brown eyes. "I'm not normally so grouchy, as you well know, and I was a bit cranky yesterday, but you simply must understand that everything just got on top of me. I have a responsibility to the shop and everything I sell to my customers. I like to sell them the best quality stuff, and a pipe like that, used by a murderer, seems like an irresponsible thing to sell one of my customers, don't you think?" "A bit cranky, I think. Oh, I think you were a hell of a lot more than that. In truth, I'd prefer to be around a trumpeting elephant than you, the way you were goading me yesterday." "To be fair, Gladys, you really were outrageously angry," I said, determined to make my point. "Most of the stuff we have in the shop, we don't know where it comes from. For all we know, those jackets over there could have belonged to the Italian mafia. You'd have been quite happy to sell that pipe if I hadn't told you who it had belonged to. You have to admit that that is true, and the girl might never have told me its origins." Gladys rolled her eyes in the back of her head. "I can see, Gwen, you're determined to argue with me over this. Didn't I say we should just let it go? I said I'm sorry. Now do you forgive me or not? I don't want us to be at each other's throats like a couple of bickering seagulls. That is so unnecessary, and it's not us. I don't want this whole sordid business to come between us. You're like someone who's got a bee in their bonnet and just won't let it go, will you, Gwen?" "Of course I forgive you, but I think you made a mountain out of a molehill about the pipe, that's all. Let's move on from there, shall we, Gwen, and agree to disagree on this subject. Now, do you mind sorting out some of those coats that came into the shop last week? Some of them are high quality, I must say." "Leave it with me," I said. I was glad to have moved on from the angst of the previous day. There was no point in holding grudges, and although I had forgiven Gladys, I still felt annoyed with her. I couldn't help it. The dark clouds of the previous gloomy, depressing day seemed to be a thing of the past, as prisms of bright, cheery sunlight danced joyously around the pavement, and people entered the shop with a genuine frisky spring in their steps, minus their puffer jackets and parkas. So perhaps the cold winter days were finally behind us. I could only hope. But I wasn't going to abandon my puffer jacket just yet, because if I did, like clockwork, the cold weather would come back with a vengeance, just to spite me. There was no sign of the mysterious dark-haired girl returning to search for her missing snake. The following day in the shop, things got outlandishly bizarre. So bizarre, in fact, that I had no way of comprehending what the hell was going on. Years after the event, I would ask myself what really did transpire, but no explanations were ever forthcoming, and it was one of those things I'd have to accept that I'd never know the answer to. At the time, I was receiving a donation from a client, and this was an agreeable donation, the kind we love to receive at the thrift shop, as the lady was donating some designer clothes that no longer fitted her, because she'd picked up a few extra pounds and gone up 3 or 4 dress sizes, owing to her huge weakness for Ben and Jerry's ice cream. "It's ever since my husband died," she told me. "I used to be as slim as a bean post, you know. I couldn't even put on weight, even if I tried. I had a fabulous metabolism back then. Or maybe it was that I just didn't have a desperate sweet tooth in those days. Let's just say after Rolf died, I got very depressed, terribly sad, you know. I'd lie there on my bed, crying and crying. I missed my husband so terribly. Nothing prepares you for a loss like that. One day I went to the grocer's and returned home with a couple of containers of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I think I bought Americone Dream or something like that, and strawberry ice cream, and oh my God, it was so good. It melted on the tongue, literally slipped down the back of my throat, and made the world a much better place. Instead of lying on my bed doing nothing, staring up at the ceiling, wishing I was dead, and feeling desperately sorry for myself, the sweet creaminess of that delicious ice cream lifted my spirits exponentially like nothing else I know. I became inspired. I wanted to live again. Whatever they may say about sugar and fat, it can revive a dying woman. I'm testimony to that fact. It did that for me. I took the dog for a walk, watched Netflix on my phone, went to visit a good friend of mine who nearly passed out with shock to see me standing there on her doorstep. She thought I was wallowing in my lugubrious melancholia. I literally came out of my shell. I'm telling you, those Ben and Jerry's ice creams made my grief more bearable. I even wrote to the manufacturers, you know, and told them, "You saved my life." They responded in kind by sending me a free voucher for over 100 of their ice creams. These days I try to limit the amount of Ben and Jerry's I eat, because I don't want to end up the size of a pot-bellied pig. But the damage has been done. At my age, let's just say it's impossible to shift the extra weight. My metabolism is not what it used to be. But I've never been able to fit into those skinny clothes ever again. More's the pity. But guess what? I don't actually care a jot. These days I've got bigger things in my life to worry about than what size my butt is. So what if I'm a few clothes size larger than what I was? Anyway, I didn't want these gorgeous designer pieces of mine to go to waste. That would be a dreadful pity. So I thought, why not donate them to someone less fortunate than myself, who might enjoy wearing some of these pieces that otherwise they'd never be able to afford to buy themselves. "They're really lovely," I admitted, sifting through her designer creations. "You've got excellent taste in clothes. And that is quite some story. You should be advertising Ben and Jerry's on television. I think on my way back home from work, I'm going to have to pick up a tub, based on what you're telling me. In terms of the size thing, it happens to us a lot here at the in-the-closet thrift store. Getting people's clothes that they've outgrown. It's a common thing." "Well, that's a polite way of putting it, isn't it?" said the lady. "Gwen! Gwen, where are you? Please come over here right now," came Gladys's voice. "Excuse me a moment. My colleague is calling me." The woman nodded. "I think that is my cue to go. I hope someone enjoys the clothes." "I'm sure they will. Thank you, Mrs. Harris, very much." "Only a pleasure, my dear. Only a pleasure." "Gwen, get over here right now," said Gladys. Her face had gone red. The tone of her voice was far from amused. Indeed, it had sounded as if she wanted to kill me. Don't tell me her ugly mood from the day before yesterday had suddenly reappeared. "Get over here now, Gwen," she called out to me again, and I could hear an anger rising in her voice. I hurriedly dashed over to the counter, wondering what all the fuss was about, and that was when I saw a short, stocky man standing there. He had a thick neck, bald, shiny head, thick, bushy black eyebrows that framed his piercing blue eyes. He was pointing to me rather rudely, with his short, stumpy fingers. "That's right, that's her, that was her. She sold me the pipe yesterday," he said, throwing the pipe at Gladys, where it landed inches away from her on the countertop, with a powerful pinging sound. I was confounded and disquieted to see the pipe again. It had made an unfortunate reappearance. I thought I'd thrown it away in the dumpster the previous day at Gladys's command, as she was claiming she wanted nothing more to do with it.
That bloody pipe that you sold me, lady, it nearly killed me last night. Something was trying to suffocate me in my bloody bed while I was sleeping, or more to the point, someone. I got a glimpse of a very evil face. It was like a gargoyle. Never seen anything so hideous in my life. But my hand went right through him. But his hands were firmly around my throat, and I could physically feel them. He was squeezing me. I thought I was going to die. My wife saw the whole bloody thing transpire. She was helpless to set me free from this entity. I'm telling you, it's bad, very bad. And he mentioned the pipe, something about me stealing his pipe or something. There's something demonical about it. Even as I speak, there is a priest at our home blessing the place. I thought I would return the pipe to you, and my advice is to get rid of the bloody thing and to send it back to where it came from. It's your responsibility now, not mine. I cannot have that thing anywhere near my home.
Is this true, Gwen? Said Gladys, looking at me grimly, with a told-you-so expression on her face, as if I was a naughty schoolgirl that she wanted to reprimand for insubordinate behaviour. Did you sell this man here the pipe? I thought I told you to dispose of that pipe in the bin outside. I made that very clear, Gwen, that you were to get rid of it. And the clothes that the woman donated, have you put them in the store as well? Have you sold them to other people? I told you not to do that. Why did you go against all my advice? I stared in confoundment at the pipe, and then at the strange man. I'd never seen him a day before in my life, and I'd thrown the pipe in the dumpster the day before yesterday. I recall doing it very clearly. I would certainly have remembered if I had sold it to this gentleman, I assured Gladys obsequiously. I was wondering why the man was lying about my selling the pipe to him. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't know what's going on. I did throw the pipe in the bin the day before yesterday, and I certainly did not sell this pipe to you. Absolutely not. I've never seen you before, sir, with the greatest of respect. The man's brows furrowed together. It scrunched up his entire face. I'll have you know, madam, you sold me this pipe yesterday, he insisted. I remember that clearly. I don't know why your memory is so vague. I was here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon precisely, in the thrift store. You told me this pipe was a rare treasure, and that I was very fortunate to get to buy it at such a fabulous price. I will have you know I want nothing more to do with it. The moment I brought it home, bad things began to happen. He opened his collar to reveal some dark finger marks around his neck. Look at this. If you think I'm making this up, explain this to me. What do you see here? They're finger marks. This was where I was squeezed last night, within an inch of my life. I stared in abject disbelief. There were indeed dark finger marks around the man's neck, as if someone had attempted to strangle him. Now do you believe me, or do you doubt my story? Someone tried to strangle me last night. It was a demonical entity, I will say that. I wish to God you weren't lying to me, madam. I remember you sold me this pipe yesterday. You were very enthusiastic about it. You were wearing a pink cashmere sweater with pearl buttons down the middle. Anyway, I'm going, said the man. I shall never be buying anything from the thrift store again, with the greatest of respect. If you want my opinion, you need to check out who you get your second-hand stuff from before you put it up for sale. You can't be too careful, you know. Thank you very much, Mr. Oliver, for bringing this dreadful situation to our attention. I think you're absolutely right. We're going to have to be a lot more discerning about whose stuff we actually put up in the shop for sale. I honestly don't know what to say. I can't believe what happened to you. Please accept my greatest apologies. It's not necessary, but get rid of that pipe if you want my advice.
After the man had left, Gladys gave me a defiant glare. "See," she told me, "you can't tell me it's a coincidence that the man was strangled last night. It has absolutely everything to do with that bloody awful pipe. Why you went behind my back to sell it to a customer, Gwen, I honestly don't know. That was a sneaky thing of you to do. And to lie straight-faced to that man. You should be ashamed of yourself. I told you it would bring nothing but trouble. But you would not listen, would you? If you weren't my very good friend, I'd tell you to bugger off. But I will overlook this just for once. But in the future, when I tell you to get rid of something, I would really appreciate it if you would listen, Gwen. You can be so bloody-minded at times, thinking you have the answer and the solution to everything. You really did think that pipe was a collector's item, didn't you? And you really could not bear to throw it away. It was too much for you. So behind my back you go selling this person's stuff, when I strictly told you not to do it, and I am the manager of this store. You're not running it. I'm in charge. I'd like you to remember that."
Gladys, listen to me, will you? I threw the pipe away in the dumpster yesterday like I told you I did, with those clothes. I never sold them to that man. Either he is lying or something really weird is going on here, which I can't explain.
"What were you wearing yesterday, Gwen? Remind me. A cashmere sweater, pink it was, with pearl buttons down the middle. That man could not have known that if he wasn't here yesterday. How could he have returned the pipe if one of us had not sold it to him? And I would never have sold him that pipe. So you did, and you know you did, and I wish you wouldn't lie."
If I did sell it, Gladys, I have no memory of it whatsoever. I must have been in some kind of trance. That's the only explanation I have.
"Look, Gwen, as long as you get rid of that bloody pipe, that's all I care about now. My advice is you do it now. I don't want the thing anywhere near this shop."
I stared at the pipe, as if it was my bitter enemy. It was lying on the table, and begrudgingly, very reluctantly, with a vacillating hesitancy, I put it in my purse. I'd have to ask my husband what should be done with the thing. He'd know exactly what to do. I was sure if I put it in the dumpster, another person would claim I'd sold it to them, and Groundhog Day would play itself all over again in my life. And worse still, Gladys would be thinking I was determined to sell the pipe behind her back out of sheer spite, like a disgruntled employee determined to wind up my boss. It would only serve to sour our friendship for good, and I couldn't allow that to happen. My former scepticism about things that go bump in the night had withered away, like a dying flower in the meadow. Now I was convinced that not only was the pipe cursed, but a demonical entity was attached to the thing. I do remember the girl with the long dark hair and the different-coloured eyes had distinctly told me that the killer on death row had declared to her own uncle,
"Tell them I'll be coming back. I'll be coming back, and I'll get them."
Could his spirit be behind the strange black marks on the man's neck? I was now beginning to really regret accepting the pipe from the young girl. It was my responsibility to get rid of the damn thing, but it was freaking me the hell out, and I was becoming almost as paranoid as Gladys had been. But I refused to show her my disquiet, and assured her that I had got rid of the pipe. I knew she did not buy my story about throwing the pipe away, and thought I had deliberately sold it to a customer. There was no point in convincing her otherwise, as it would only provoke another argument between the two of us. When I returned home that evening and told Lucas the very bizarre story, he was more than a little discomposed. He studied the pipe closely, affirming that the writing on the side of the pipe in Hungarian did indeed mean "the devil rides with me." For the first time I could see a horrified look appearing on his face.
"I'll phone the pastor in the morning," he told me, "but in the meantime I will lock the pipe up in my toolbox and leave it in the yard shed. Everything will be fine, I'm most sure. After all, when the pipe was safely locked away in a glass cabinet, it didn't do anyone any harm, so we should do the same."
My husband had a good point, and I felt certain that if the pipe was safely locked away, no harm would befall us. Throughout the day a dark cloud of negativity had hung around me, as I inwardly fretted about what I was going to do about the pipe. I felt as if I was harbouring a stick of dynamite in my purse that had the potential to explode in my face. But now the pipe was locked away, I felt a huge measure of relief. I could finally relax. Gladys had noticed that I had looked a little peaky and on edge all day, and had kindly tried to encourage me, but had no way of appreciating the turmoil I was privately going through.
"Look, Gwen, I don't blame you for what happened. You really did believe the pipe was benign, didn't you? It was freaky to see what happened to that poor man, and yes, I suspect it was connected to the pipe. But please, sweetheart, don't blame yourself. You thought the pipe was harmless. You sold it to the man to make a good point to me, and I get it. I'm not mad at you. All is forgiven and forgotten. The main thing is if the man is fine and his house is now being cleansed by a priest. You've thrown the pipe away, so let's move on, shall we? As I keep telling you, all is forgiven and forgotten. You're my very best friend. We won't let this little shenanigans come between us, surely."
I knew better than to tell Gladys the truth. She didn't handle stress terribly well, and if she realised that I had not sold the pipe to that man, she'd probably be feeling very unsettled and discomposed. So I kept the details of the matter to myself. That night when I returned to bed, I felt as if a load had been lifted off my mind. Thank God the pipe was finally locked up in a safe place, in my husband's toolbox in the yard shed. I could breathe a huge sigh of relief. I knew my husband would find a solution for us. I sank back gratefully into the sumptuous cosy folds of my feathery goose-down pillows, with a huge measure of relief, after having swallowed a couple of aspirins to eliminate the throbbing headache in the back of my skull, which had been brought on by the day's stress. But thankfully it was beginning to subside, and the warm banana milk my husband had brought me helped wage war against my migraines with an incredible efficiency. It certainly worked like a treat. My husband would whiz warm milk, bananas and honey together in a food processor, and my headache would magically dissipate. My husband had been taught this neat trick by a master of natural medicine, who swore the potassium and sugar in the bananas deflated the gas in a migraine headache. I'm not suggesting it would work for other people, but it worked for me. Before long I'd slipped away into a peaceful slumber, grabbing on to the restful tranquillity it brought me, with a fervent hunger. I needed my beauty sleep more than ever before, as the inauspicious events over the last 48 hours or so had robbed me of all my peace, filling my entire body with a nervous disquiet, the likes of such I'd never experienced before or since. I knew from now on that at the In the Closet thrift shop I'd be more discerning about any donations that I chose to accept. If I had known where the young lady with the dark hair lived, I would have returned the pipe back to her in a heartbeat and suggested she kept it permanently locked up in their glass cabinet. But in my husband's locked-up toolbox in the outside yard shed, well, that was the next best thing. It was later that night that I woke up to hear a loud roaring sound. I was caught up in a dreamy state, but as I shook the sleepy slumber away from me and sat up, I heard the roar again. It was an angry sound. I remember thinking, what is that? You would think with everything that had transpired to me of late that I would be consumed with a dreadful fear and foreboding, but I was more curious than afraid. I'd never heard a sound like that before, apart from on wildlife documentaries. Truly, it sounded as if a virile male lion was in our backyard, making his presence known to every other male lion in the territory. It was more than a little bizarre, to say the least, to hear a noise like that in North Carolina, of all places, where lions are not indigenous to the natural habitat here. But the sound was exactly the same as a lion's. I decided I needed to investigate the sound, especially when I heard it yet again. If I didn't know any better, I'd think I was camping out in the wilds of Africa, hearing the distant roars of lions. Only this was way too close for comfort, as if the sound was coming from outside our cottage. I was dumbfounded to see that my husband had not woken up to those roaring sounds. You'd think he'd have bounced out of his dreams faster than a kangaroo. He was blissfully fast asleep, oblivious to what was going on. I discerned he would not thank me for waking him up. But something was out there. The question was what? I climbed out of bed with a measure of trepidation, mixed with a burning sense of inquisitiveness. The Arctic air in our bedroom was frosty, and climbing out of my bed, I was hit with an uncongenial pair of cold hands. I instinctively reached out for my dressing gown that was lying over the upholstered chair near the small little fireplace. I slipped my arms gratefully into the warm, very cosy fabric, and slipped my feet into my slippers. The bedroom looked like it was a soupy tea colour, so I could see my way around, as we keep night lights on throughout the cottage, so we can navigate our way throughout our home without switching on intrusive bright lights that can be terribly blinding when you're in a sleep-induced state. A chill ran down my spine when I heard the roaring sound again. I tiptoed cautiously and very discreetly down the rather creaking staircase. Soon I was trudging down the passage and had entered the kitchen. All the blinds in the kitchen were wide open, so the moonlight trickled magnanimously through the windows, and the tenebrific night from beyond the kitchen was less intimidating, as I could see the silhouettes of the trees and discern the natural environment, even if it was rather ambiguous. What I did next surprised even me, and I certainly would not recommend that others do the same if they were to hear such a powerful roaring sound. But it was so close to the cottage, I simply had to find out what it was. The roars began again, and I found myself slipping out of the cottage with a fire poker in my hand, not really considering the danger I could potentially find myself in. A wiser, more astute person would have remained locked up safely in their home, but I had abandoned my wisdom, as if it was an old overcoat that I did not want to wear. I moved clandestinely towards the roaring sound. It appeared to be coming from the yard shed, where my husband had stored the strange Hungarian pipe. But at that time, in the muddled state of my confusion, I never even thought about the pipe. My mind was finely tuned in to that sound. Every cell in my body was standing up in attention with a pronounced sensitivity, and I could pick up a furious energy in the atmosphere, and soon I found myself standing behind the outbuilding that overlooked the shed. I clung to the wall like a burgeoning creeper and peered around the side of the wall very cautiously. I shut my eyes tightly and held my breath. I was frightened about what I would soon see. The roar was so loud and so close it almost knocked me off balance and vibrated through me like a booming drum in a heavy metal band. What I saw next was staggering. There are no words to describe it. In the backyard I observed this huge humanoid silhouette of a gargantuan beast, with a human-like appearance, covered with long, flowing dark hair, and a face that was like an Indian warrior. This powerful beast was roaring like a lion, and he was irate. Even the sounds of crickets and frogs remained mute, not daring to perforate the veil of this discomposing energy that immediately commanded your respect. I could feel his anger pierce the darkness with the violence of a very feisty windstorm that can tear structures apart without much restraint. This powerful beast was easily over 9 foot tall, possibly more, built with the robust indestructibility of a bulletproof army tank. There was a wild wind blowing against my skin, and its icy fingers brushed abrasively against my face. I didn't feel it. I remained rooted to the spot, staring at this absurd creature, in total confoundment and wondrous awe. For despite the creature's daunting appearance, there was something so magisterial, so lordly about his gait. And that was when it hit me, like a sharp slap across the face. The creature was a Bigfoot. Oh my God! It was a Bigfoot. I could hardly believe it. The ambiguous shadow of this obscure, lofty beast was so intimidating that everything inside me went completely numb, as if all my fears, anxieties, and stresses had been anaesthetized. I stood there, as if in a trance, watching everything unfold before me as if observing a silent movie, and wondering what the hell this idiosyncratic creature was actually doing, roaring in our backyard. What could it mean? What did it represent? Was he trying to tell other Bigfoots in the area that this was his territory, to stay the hell away? I couldn't be sure. I watched him slamming his chest in a gesture of rebellious defiance.
almost as if he was saying, "Don't you mess with me." He was oscillating his arms in the air, as if he was meeting up with some indiscernible microscopic confrontational resistance, and was punching it out of the way, as he fisted it with his powerful hands, as if he was attacking a foe that was not physically discernible to the naked eye, but was clearly very visible to him, almost as if he could see things in our world others could clearly not. Weirder still was when he hit this invisible thing, whatever in God's name it was. It sounded like he was punching something seriously solid. The Bigfoot appeared to be winning this fight. The pewter-grey sky, bespeckled with the magnanimous prisms of moonlight, enabled me to see every obscure feature of his face clearly, and there was something so noble about this giant of the woods that appeared to have supernatural abilities that simply blew my mind. He roared again, and with a powerful foot and one kick, the door of the yard shed came crumbling down. It was flung off its hinges. Moments later, the sky was being littered with yard forks and spades that flew in the air for a moment and were flung all over the place indiscriminately, like scaffolding that breaks away from a building. They hit the ground with a mighty thunderous crash, like pieces of steel confetti. I realized what he was doing, although I couldn't make sense of it at all. This doggedly determined Bigfoot had grabbed my husband's locked toolbox that contained the Hungarian pipe that had once belonged to a serial killer. He shook its contents rigorously, like a baby's rattle, flinging it onto the ground so violently hard that it broke apart. The lock had been fully shredded, and the contents spilled out onto the ground. It would seem all kinds of tools, from screwdrivers to wrenches, were laying scattered all over the grass. And then the Bigfoot ruffled through the items, his focus intense, and his eyes widened as he grabbed the Hungarian pipe. And once again he roared so loudly that I could swear the ground beneath me vibrated indignantly, and my feet wobbled unsteadily. He studied the Hungarian pipe in his thick fingers, snarling in disgust, his nostrils flaring. I realized he found what he was looking for, and he found it to be very offensive. How could the Bigfoot have known the pipe was lying in this toolbox? Could he have picked up on the ungodly energy of the thing? I was mesmerized by what I was beholding, but what happened next sent the fear of God shooting into every single cell in my body, so that everything within me rattled with a foreboding sense of impending dread. So much so that I was physically incapable of reacting or putting up any defense, but that would have been useless, because the thing attacking me I could not physically see. I could feel the powerful fists from a violent heavy hand thrusting into my back so hard that inwardly I squirmed in pain. Then my ears began to tickle, as I felt heavy breathing on my neck and in my ears. I was faint with horror. My mouth opened and closed with the full intention of screaming, but my voice box was tongue-tied. No words came out. That was when I heard the disembodied, raspy voice in my ear, using even fouler words that I can care to mention, involving women's body parts in a derogatory manner. And then he screamed, "Stop him now, you bitch! Stop him now!" The fist jabbed into me again, and I almost jumped out of my skin as the voice growled into my ear threateningly. And when I turned around, I saw him, the most evil, despicable-looking man that I have ever beheld in my life, with eyes so black they were completely devoid of light. He was giving me murderous looks. His villainous face was almost disfigured by the hatred he unleashed towards me, so that he almost became like an ugly, grotesque-looking gargoyle. He screamed at me, "Stop him, you bitch! Stop him now!" He pushed me so hard that I fell flat on my face onto the ground, grazing my chin, and rubbing my nose so hard that it began to bleed. I raised myself to my feet, wiping my bloody nose with the back of my sleeve. I looked behind me, but the evil-looking entity had all but gone. But I could still feel him watching me, his eyes burning into me like red-hot coals, and I was so afraid. I could sense he was trying to physically push me to approach the Bigfoot and retrieve the pipe for him. Where was he? And more to the point, who was he? Why couldn't I see him any more?
He was there only a moment ago. I turned around to watch the Bigfoot. He was roaring again. His anger seemed insatiable, like a hungry wildfire you couldn't easily put out. I watched in amazement as the Bigfoot threw the pipe onto the ground, and beneath his powerful, ponderous feet he began crushing it into a fine powder. I heard the voice screaming into my ear again.
"Look what you've done, you bitch! Look what you've done! I'll get you for this!"
And when I turned around, the human figure, with a contorted face, was there for a moment and then vaporized before my eyes like a ghost. But I have never beheld such evil as I did in that contorted, disfigured face, scrunched up by the expression of a vengeful hatred. But I knew he had been defeated by the Bigfoot. But he screamed in the quiet silence of the night. I could hear his voice.
"I'll be back! I will be back! The devil rides with me!"
I am certain I encountered the evil spirit of the serial killer, whose connection to this world was through his pipe. But now the Bigfoot had obliterated it, and his power had gone. The Bigfoot roared again, but this time the roar sounded contented and satisfied, rather like a lion who's eaten a hearty meal, and feels comfortably full and satisfied, and reasonably mellow as a result, almost as if his former anger had all but whittled away. He turned around and glided away, moving with such an incredible grace, as he swung his arms backwards and forwards through the grove of trees, until he was gone. And in that moment an incredible peace washed over me, as I knew I would never have to worry about that pipe again. Suffice to say, the first thing my husband said when he saw the state of the yard shed the following morning, the broken door, and the buckled-up toolbox lying across the grass.
"What the hell happened here?"
I looked at him and sighed. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Let's just say some things are stranger than fiction. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, wasn't that an incredible story? I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. It sent shivers down my spine. It was incredible. And it really does make you reevaluate anything that you might acquire that is second-hand from somewhere. I'd like to hear your comments in the description about how you would feel about getting a pipe from someone who had been involved in the murders of 15 women and 2 prison guards. Personally, I think I'd rather say no to that, because I do think things can have energy. What do you think? I have to say the story was absolutely amazing from start to finish, and I hope you agree with me there. Until next time, goodbye and good night.